too young, too old, too smart, not smart enough, too wore open-toed shoes to the Federal Reserve, which is apparently some kind of no-no. All of these different things that I had done, and I was really excited to get to Washington. And what I discovered pretty quickly is that the most rewarding and most important part of the job happens here in the community. And that if you are not recentering yourself and anchoring yourself, just like you all do each week by coming here and being in community, if you're not doing that as a congressperson, I personally could not find the moral core, the fortitude, sometimes the optimism to keep doing this work. And so it is communities like events like this that are really my favorite part of the job. And it is the trips to Washington that I'll be honest, take it out of me. And it is the coming back here that restores me. So thank you for letting me be part of your service for that. I know you have great questions for me, so I'm gonna keep my remarks very, very short. This will probably be the shortest speech by an elected official that you ever hear. It's certainly shorter than the ones that Mayor Steinberg gives. I'm not gonna, for those of you who know me, you've probably already gathered that I'm a pretty straight shooter, and so I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. There are really strong feelings within the Jewish community, within the broader American community, within the Jewish diaspora, within the communities within Israel, about how to create a path forward for Israel. And for many of us, it comes out of a deep, deep love of Israel and a belief in what the promise of Israel holds. And that is something that is particularly important to Jews, but it is also really important to non-Jews to see a flourishing, successful, democratic state in Israel. How we continue that, how we best make progress on that, I can assure you, as somebody who's made the mistake of answering the phone in her own office, that is something on which we have disagreement. And in that sense, we mirror very much what is happening in Israel right now. And at the time that we were there, it was a time of very, very large, significant protests in the street, and also as we approach and have celebrated Israel's 75th anniversary, a time to look back at all that Israel has accomplished and to ask ourselves, where now? How forward do we go to Israel what it needs to be, which is a vibrant, democratic Jewish state. And so that I think the challenges are very real on, and I'm gonna talk with you frankly about some of that. Part of, I think, what we have to acknowledge is that the relationship that the United States has with Israel comes in part out of the fact that we are both pluralistic democracies. We are both countries in which disagreement and different views, both religious and otherwise, are part of the fabric of what makes us successful. But that fabric has to continue to be sort of protected, and we do that through both structural things, separation of different powers, thinking about how to engage voters, and we also do it through our individual activism. And we are seeing that process both here in the United States, and we are seeing that process very much in Israel. And I think as someone who was elected in 2018 at a time of great upheaval politically in the United States, where there were very large protests and very vibrant disagreements about the direction our country was going, seeing some of that same kind of debate and dialogue and back and forth in Israel was powerful. It made me feel very connected to the work that Israel is trying to do as a nation state, and the plight and struggles and hope that Israeli leaders are facing are not unlike those that I see in our country and in our capital. And so it was a really incredible trip. I'll just highlight a few of the things that I thought were most valuable from my trip. I'm happy to tell you more about the entire itinerary. The highlight was drinking with Rabbi Steinberg, of course. And I just want to say for the record, only one of us drank, and I'll let you fill that in. We spent time starting why am I blanking? We spent time starting in Tel Aviv. Thank you. We spent time starting in Tel Aviv. We toured the Peres Center for Peace and Innovation, which was an incredible opportunity to help understand the story of Israel, and that the Israel that I see today, the Israel that I even remember in the 80s and 90s is not where Israel started. And that's history that is so important for us to learn and to look at, just as we are discussing the importance of looking honestly at our American history, including the parts of it that are amazing and celebratory and the parts of it that we are still healing from. And so that was a really fun experience. We did a walking tour on the formation of Tel Aviv and Old Tel Aviv from one of the founders, one of the early settlers. Many of you have seen that famous photo of the Tel Aviv settlers on the sand dividing up, and they had a lottery on plots of land, and I got to meet one of the people whose grandparents were part of that lottery. We met with several members of Knesset, and that was we traveled to Jerusalem, met with several members of Knesset. Part of the goal of the trip was explicitly to meet with those with whom we likely had disagreement. That was a very intentional element of the trip. So we met with everyone from Merav Michaeli, labor leader, Yair Lapid. We met with Mansour Abbas of the United Arab List, very wide range of members of the Knesset. We met with the Israeli ambassador. We met with the U.S. ambassador to Israel. And then we were able to meet, I think for me, one of the most important meetings that I took and that I pushed very, very hard for is to meet with the prime minister, to meet with Mr. Netanyahu. And that was somewhat controversial within the group. I was with some members who have met with him many times and who thought that was a very important part of traveling there and part of diplomacy. And I met with other people who were looking at what was happening in the streets of Israel and questioning if taking that meeting was sending a message counter to where we thought Israel needed to go. And I thought it was very, very important that we had that meeting, and I was very grateful to Mr. Netanyahu. Not surprisingly, I didn't agree with everything he said, and he didn't agree with everything I said. But he spent over 90 minutes with us. And I'm an elected leader. I am very familiar with the little note that they pass to you that says it's time to leave. And then when you don't wrap up the meeting, they start tapping. And then eventually they just sit down right next to you and lean on you. And he withstood many rounds of that by his staff who were trying to extract him from what could have been and was at sometimes a difficult conversation with U.S. leaders. That's important. That's impressive. Whatever we think of different decisions of different parts of that coalition, some of which I think are very much anchored in the liberal tradition of Israel, some of which I think are very troubling to many of us. I think he did what I want to see leaders around the world and what I want to see our leaders model, which is engage in that conversation, be able to have honest conversations about our shared goals, even if we sometimes have different strategies how to get there. I also had of course, I visited Yad Vashem, and that was an incredibly powerful experience. We also had a chance to spend time in East Jerusalem and to spend time in the Palestinian territories. We also visited a kibbutz right on the border with Gaza and met with a longtime settler there in kibbutzim who has shrapnel in her yard that has fallen from Gaza, and talked about, and she took us to the border fence that separates the kibbutz. There's kind of a no man's zone there, and you can look out and you can see Gaza. And she told me that every day she walks that fence line, and that what she thinks about is how there is somebody there like her, a mother, a religious person, a community leader, who is walking that same fence in Gaza, wanting peace, wanting a different life, wanting to be safe. And that is sort of her daily reflection, how she centers herself in that difficult situation. So I'm happy to say more about it. I'm just sharing some of what I thought was most important. It was my first trip to Israel. It will not be my last. There was a long bucket list of things that I want to do. I met some of the other Reform leaders who were there, including one who was going to go to the Western Wall, where we also, of course, went. But she was going to go and pray with a group of women in the men's area of the Western Wall. And I was very interested in this. And so I said, I'll come. And they said, oh, well, we get up very early. I said, I have 3 kids. Like, like I'm bi-coastal, like sleep is a stranger. I said, great, I'm so excited. I'm gonna be there like 6 a.m., 5:30 a.m. We're gonna meet in the hotel. We're gonna go, I'm gonna witness this. And about 10 minutes after I made these plans, I got a phone call from the trip leader, and he said, absolutely not, because he was worried about my safety and my security there. I think for me, the single most surprising thing about Israel that I did not know was I did not fully appreciate with the huge, tremendous, vibrant reform community that we have in Orange County and in America. I didn't understand how that fit into religious practice in Israel. And I think that was, for me, the thing that I read a lot. I take a lot of meetings with a lot of different organizations, and I think that was something that I did not know about the struggle for religious practice and religious freedom and religious pluralism, even within a Jewish state, and that was an educational moment for me. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really want to tell you. Oh, I wanted to talk just briefly about one last thing, a policy thing to lead us into the questions, which is I wanted to make sure everyone heard about President Biden's administrative strategy to counter anti-Semitism. This is the first time that our country, and this actually I think is telling, particularly in light of our country's history, this is the first time we've had an explicit whole of government acknowledgement of anti-Semitism and of the need to combat it. And I think this is a really, really important thing that the US government has done. It has three basic components. The first component is to acknowledge and to kind of create awareness of the degree of anti-Semitism that we're facing. I think we all sadly are aware that we're seeing double digits, sometimes 30-40% increase in anti-Semitism year over year. We've seen it here in our own community, including at this very temple. We've seen it at the JCC, where I am a longtime member and an infrequent exerciser. Let's face it, I have that in common with most of you. So the first part is to educate and to create awareness. We've had a lot of talk about the rise in Asian hate in our community. That is also a very real struggle, but that is not unconnected. Hate incidents across the board are on the rise, and anti-Semitism is a core, sadly, is inextricably tied to these other hate movements and to white nationalist movements. So the first part is to really educate, acknowledge, create awareness. The second part is to make sure that our Jewish communities are safe, both in their places of worship, but in the broader community. This includes an explicit call from President Biden to fully fund the nonprofit security grant program. I know you all have applied for and received these funds, as of many other temples. The request to fully fund it is $360 million. Having just gone through a debt ceiling debate, I have to tell you, shortcutting the safety of a threatened community is not the path to dealing with our budget problems. We have to fully fund this, and each time we fully fund it, by the way, we learn about the need, and the need is growing, right? And so while some of our temples have taken up on this fund, we are increasingly seeing the Sikh community is under attack, the Buddhist community is under attack. We need to keep growing that. And so that fully funding that, and Mike Levin and I have led letters on this in the past, and it is great to see the administration squarely talk about the need to do that. The third part of the strategy, I think, is the most bold and by far and away the most important, which is to reverse anti-Semitism, to not sort of be content with bunkering down and withdrawing and into safety, but instead to actually try to counter that trend, and to do that through education. It includes, for the first time in our country's history, a directive to the Department of Education to create curricula and programs on anti-Semitism to be used across our nation's educational system, K through post-university. That is incredibly important, and to have the federal government explicitly taking that on, I think, is a really important milestone in our country's history. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my license plate on my minivan is OVRSITE, oversight. Why I care so much about that is I think it's often very easy, especially when it comes to really hard challenges like anti-Semitism, to announce something great at a press conference, we are against anti-Semitism, and then to not make it happen on the ground. The Biden president, his administration is showing leadership. How we deliver on these promises there's gonna be a role for each one of us. in asking questions of candidates, in engaging in that educational activity, in talking in our schools about what kids are being taught, what teachers know about anti-Semitism and about Israel. And so that I'll be monitoring over the ongoing years how that is happening. I should add, the last point is that with the education, one of the parts that I think is exciting is it's an explicit call on social media companies to do more to counter anti-Semitism. And one of my very early hearings on oversight was with one of the witnesses was the president of the Anti-Defamation League, and I learned about their center in Silicon Valley, which explicitly exists to work with technology companies on how to use technology to counter hatred online. It's an incredible program, and during the pandemic, I had an online town hall with them to learn about what strategies we can use as users of social media, but also what can the tech companies really do? What kind of expectations should we have on them? And I'm excited to see that as an explicit part of this strategy. So I think I'll stop there, hand it back to you, Rabbi Steinberg. I went on a little bit longer, but I actually realized I have a lot I want to share with you.
Well, thank you.
My trip to Israel meant a lot to me, and there was a lot I wanted to say, so.
Thank you so much. Had I known it was, yeah, absolutely. Had I known it was going to be a roast of Rabbi Steinberg, that might have been a different story. We're really glad you're here, Katie. Thank you so much. I want to stay on anti-Semitism for a moment. We are in a battle right now in the Santa Ana School District, which has passed a pretty virulent anti-Israel, anti-Semitic curriculum called Ethnic Studies in different portions. So we're working really hard with them to see if there are things that we can do, which you mentioned, and I was really glad to hear this, about a safe, democratic Jewish Israel. That really makes me feel good about that. But what happens is the conflation of things. And the question is simply this. You mentioned white nationalism as a place for anti-Semitism. We're also feeling it on the very far left of anti-Semitism that comes out in things like these ethnic studies programs that calls Israel a colonizer and things of this nature. And I'm just wondering, if we're going to fight anti-Semitism, how do we do it, yes, on the right? That just seems kind of more obvious. But how on the left, too?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And look, we have seen, by the way, in the political environment, since my time in Congress, a big change in how the debates about supporting Israel go. And there were always people who wanted to do more, wanted to do less, who wanted to do something different. But now, when there's disagreement, what happens very quickly is people accuse each other of being anti-Semitic. And I think we have to find ways in our government as well as in curricula to disagree on the best path to peace for Israel, with the Palestinians, with the Middle East, and allow that disagreement to not be characterized as anti-Semitism. And that is happening. It's being weaponized by people on the right to fight people on the left. People on the left are engaged in ignorant and hateful statements that push and create division within our Democratic Party. It's a real phenomenon, and it's a real problem. I think that I will tell you, and maybe this will give you some heart, I think it is much better in real life than it is on Twitter. I think some of what has been said on Twitter is pretty hateful and pretty upsetting. I think in real life it is better, but I think this is partly why the work that groups do to educate us, to come meet with us, to invite us to come be in community like this are really, really important. But I think the debate over ethnic studies is going to continue. California has passed that curricula requirement, and now the question is, what are we talking about? So I think one of the things we can do as people who love and care about Israel is to affirm that we believe in ethnic studies. We believe, as people who care about a Jewish population that has been one of the most demonized, has a unique history, a painful history of persecution, of attempted extermination. I think we need to lead that debate on ethnic studies. We need to be at the fore of that curriculum rather than withdrawing from it. And I think the origins of the course were elsewhere, And now we're finding out it's problematic, and how do we engage? So I would encourage everybody to ask at your school. There is one school in Irvine that does offer ethnic studies. It's University High. My son's going to take it next year, so I will report back what he learns.
Wonderful.
But I will tell you that I think this ethnic studies course is actually a big opportunity for the Jewish community to educate kids about Israel.
We're working on it day in and day out. I would just add one thing, Congresswoman, and that is I would share with your colleagues who singularly focus on Israel to spend as much time focusing on Israel as they do on human rights in Saudi Arabia or Syria or other places where things are way worse than in a democratic, pluralistic Israel. So,
absolutely.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
can I just follow up on that and say that
please.
I think I think that there's a community of people who do that in other words, who lean pretty far left on all human rights. And I think that is probably the heart of the left part of the Democratic Party. And then there are a handful of people who I think are approaching it from a kind of Palestinian-only, more soul focus. And I think the more we talk, honestly, about what's happening in the West Bank, the more we talk honestly about the terrorist threat of Hamas and the plight of the people in Gaza, the more we talk about the threats from Iran and Lebanon and other places, I think being willing to have those conversations, as hard as they can be, actually will hopefully help kind of help them see the connections between the struggles that Israel faces in staying secure and the struggles that other countries face, and to make those analogies and to see what has been successful.
Amen. Growing up, my congressman was Tom Lantos, one of the great human rights fighters of his generation. Changing gears, from the congregation. Loved your book. It was funny and informative. Any advice to parents on how to get our kids involved in caring about the United States of America?
Yeah. So my kids have had no choice but to be involved. I wrote this book called I Swear, Politics is Messier Than My Minivan. And if you've seen my minivan, you know politics is pretty messy. And in the book, I'm very honest about what it's like for my kids and what it's like for me as a mother to be in politics. And it is challenging. I think one of the side effects of the polarization that we increasingly see in our politics, the inability of people to talk across disagreement, is that parents are increasingly sheltering their kids from political debate and political discussion because they're afraid of those debates evolving into name-calling, into hatred. And I think we have to find ways to do the opposite, to have the opposite impulse, which is that to recognize that each voice we take out of political engagement allows the voices of those who are engaging in that kind of destructive, I won't call it conversational, I'll just call it those kind of destructive activities, to grow louder. And so I think this is one of the things that we see on social media. It's something that we see on TV, that the voices are the voices of the most upset, the most outraged, the most angry. And what we're missing a lot, and what our kids really need, is a voice of inquiry, right? What does it mean? Why do people not like President so-and-so, President so-and-so? Why do Democrats and Republicans disagree? What do they even disagree about? And I will tell you, my son's eighth grade teacher has taught many years. And I went to back to school night. I rarely get to go to back to school night, so I really felt like these kids can back off for a while. Because I went to back to school night. I should say I've been at the school 9 years, so it's not like I didn't know my way around. And the eighth grade teacher, who's been there a very long time, said to the parents, we're going to be studying American history this year. We're going to be studying government. And I just want to reassure you all that I'm just going to be teaching the Constitution. I'm not going to be teaching any values. A value-free Constitution. Right? And I know exactly why that teacher said that, right? But there's no such thing as a value-free Constitution, right? And so I think really leaning into that, if you haven't taken your child to meet their congressperson, do. I write back to every kid that writes to me. personally. I make Cody right back to the other 750,000 people. We get about 500,000 letters. This is a very engaged community. So I get one of the highest numbers of letters, but I personally write back to everyone who's a student, everyone who's young. And I think that's important because what I'm trying to convey to them and what I would ask you to help convey to them is that I don't represent voters. I don't represent voters who voted for me. I represent human beings who live within the boundaries of this district. And those children are not voters, just like the DACA recipients that I represent are not voters, but they are still constituents and they still need to have a voice in our democracy. So I would encourage parents to talk with their kids about politics. You don't have to do it every night, but I think you do have to do it. Because I think the state of civic education, the fear of that 8th grade teacher that I heard in that statement makes it all the more important that we are having those conversations at home. Whatever your political beliefs are, I think having those conversations are important. And believe you me, we have them in my household. My son Luke called me a neoliberal when he got mad at me the other day. So,
Well,
the struggle is
maybe
real.
own it. I don't know.
The struggle is real.
Next question, policy question. Wondering why you voted against raising the debt limit.
Yeah, great question. So to make sure everyone's on the same page, the debt limit and the debt ceiling are not very descriptive terms. It makes it sound like it's something you hit your head on. It's not. So I'll just make sure we all understand what was at stake. Congress many years ago passed a law that says the Treasury can't spend more than X dollars. And this is called the debt ceiling. And the idea was that if you approach that, Treasury has to come back to Congress and get permission to go past that number. Now, unfortunately, what the Congress didn't do was impose on itself any actual spending discipline. And so we frequently appropriate and spend, whether it's for seniors, whether it's for food assistance, whether it's all, for the military, all kinds of different things. We have spent the money. And then the Treasury's in the unfortunate position of not being able to pay the bills without coming back to us. So it's a huge, just like when you go shopping for Hanukkah and you say, I'm just gonna get I'm gonna get little gifts this year. This year, I'm just gonna get little things for Hanukkah. But then there's so much great stuff and your kids need it all and you put it all in the cart and then you really need it, like you would tend to buy it. And then you get the bill and you add up all your Hanukkah spending and you're like, whew, I went way past my personal debt ceiling. You can't just not pay the credit card bill. You can't just default. And if you did, terrible things would happen. That's the situation the United States found itself in. We have to pay our bills. That is an inviolable principle. So you might be asking, having given this robust defense of why we have to pay our debts, why did I vote no? Here's why. Because another inviolate kind of principle that we have to have, for me, in terms of my religious beliefs, but also in terms of my as a mother, as a politician, is that we have to address climate change and we have to protect our planet. And the deal that the Biden administration cut directly put those things in tension. The giveaways to big oil, the pipeline, the reversal of judicial review for environmental projects. Think about the judicial review fight that they're having in Israel. The ability of the Israeli Supreme Court to look at a law and decide if it's constitutional. The deal that Biden cut, and I understand, a deal had to be cut. But the deal that he cut would have eviscerated the very principle of judicial review for environmental decisions. It would have greenlit a pipeline to help one particular senator, a pipeline that could never have made it through the general legal process. And it would have set back California, who is investing through our tax dollars, through changes in our lifestyle in every way in fighting climate change. This deal would have been a huge backward step for the state of California and would have left us losing decades and decades of hard work on the environment. So there were parts of the deal that I thought were true compromises. You don't always like them, but you have to make them. But the environmental and the giveaway to big oil and the rewriting of bedrock environmental laws, for me, was not the right deal to have. So we're all happy that we escaped this, but I think, frankly, Biden missed an opportunity. And one thing you know about me is I'm not afraid to stand up to people of either party. I'm a Democrat because of my values, but I am willing to hold Democrats to account. And I expect my constituents to hold me to account, and they do. I think Biden made a mistake in early on not pushing to just simply get rid of the debt ceiling. This is not the disciplining strategy on our future budget that I do think we need. We need a debate about that future budget. We need to address some of our spending. I also voted no on the National Defense Authorization Act last year. I clearly believe in national defense. I voted no because at the last minute, the night or week before, the committee voted to add 10% to what the Pentagon said they needed to keep us safe. So we continue to engage in those kinds of spending decisions, and then on the back end, we manufacture a crisis that we're asked to put our planet at risk. So it was not an easy vote, I will tell you that. And it's not an easy vote to explain because it requires a little bit of explanation. And it's easy in politics to do the thing you can say in one sentence. And it's hard to do the thing you can say in a paragraph. But I think this was the wrong outcome for California, and I am really, really worried about attacking principles like judicial review at a time when our democratic institutions here and around the world are under attack.
Yeah, for sure. Little inside baseball. You know, there's the old story that Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan would argue all day, and then they'd have drinks at night because they had a really wonderful relationship. Is that happening at all in the congressional or executive branch?
Yeah, so I'll tell you how I always hear those stories. They always sound a little, for lack of a better word, like bro-ish. Like, let's get the whiskey out, Bob, now that so I'm not sure that more drinking is what we want from our elected leaders. I will say that I think the partisanship that exists that you see in your families, in your communities, is heightened. It's stronger, we have more of the extremes. I think that is driven partly by gerrymandering. We have fewer and fewer districts like this one that we live in which I represent about equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans and independent, no-party preference voters. And so I really have to think about how am I going to explain this to someone who doesn't think I went far enough this way and who thinks I'm too far that way. And most of our elected leaders on both sides don't have to do that. They come from the safest Democratic seats and the safest Republican seats, and we have fewer and fewer seats where people go back home and have to talk to people who think differently than they do, and I think that cultivates that. I will say on a personal level, I have a lot of Republican friends, and it's almost sometimes a little embarrassing. Like the other day I was talking to a Republican, and I was trying to get him on this bill I have to deal with bank failures. And I was, busy making a fervent pitch. This bill's perfect for you. Here's what it does. I think you should get on this. And the chair of the oversight committee walked by, and he's like, "Keep talking to her. She's my partner." And he gave me the little slug in the arm, and I was like, "Wow, I'm really getting comfy over here." But I think, I will tell you, my approach has been to work with anyone who wants to work on any given issue. Because if you wait to find the person from the other party that you agree with everything on, you will never have that engagement at all. So I work with Dan Crenshaw, who's a prominent Republican, on a bill to ban scam fundraising. Scams are bad. Nobody should be in favor of scams except scammers. I work with Dan on that bill. I'm working with Doug LaMalfa from far northern California he's a Republican on bonding reform. I think oil companies should clean up their messes. I expect my daughter Betsy to do the same thing, and it's an ongoing battle. And so I think for me, what I have found is if you're willing to go over there and sit down and stick your hand out and introduce yourself, I have had almost no Republican refuse to talk to me. I don't always get them where I want them. I had a wonderful conversation once with a Republican, and we were talking about holding the Federal Reserve accountable for something, and he finished by saying, "I'm so glad we agree, abolish the Federal Reserve." And I was like,
no, just wear closed-toed shoes.
That's not, I have a grudge, but that's not what we were, I had literally not said that. So, but I will tell you, I think, I'll give you sort of an example of, I think, really good news. The Oversight Committee is the most partisan committee in Congress. I have Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert. They're on both my committees, actually. so it's all day, nonstop. So it's a very, very partisan committee. Their first two hearings, the first one was on pandemic unemployment fraud. And some of my colleagues on the left were like, this is our first hearing. There's a lot of freshmen on the committee, I should caution. So they're very fired up and they don't know what they're doing, which I know because I didn't know what I was doing 5 years ago. And they're like, let's get them. And I said, get them? Like, it's a hearing on fraud. Like, we're not the party of fraud. So who are we going to go get? Like, we as Democrats should have had this hearing. I said that over and over again. Thank God the Republicans have the chutzpah to have this hearing to look at the fact that fraud is really a struggle when you're trying to put tax dollars out to help people in a crisis. It's hard to do things quickly and deliberately at the same time. Second hearing was on the border. And some of my colleagues said this is just going to be a bunch of anti-immigrant, very hateful, anti-refugee, and there was some of that in the hearing. But there were also genuine questions about what is happening at our border. What's it like to try to do that work today on the border? And we were able to hear from officials across our southern border give their different perspectives. Democrats weren't willing to have that hearing. Their attitude was people are concerned about immigration, so let's not talk about it. That's the opposite impulse that we need to have. So I actually have a great relationship with many of my, I'm not gonna say all. I mean, Marjorie screamed at me the other day in the hallway and, you know, she's something else. But I would say in general, barring one or two people, you can actually go talk to them and they really want to talk to you. And it's been very, very productive and very, very rewarding. And I've had more time to do that now that the Republicans are in the majority. And so it's kind of been a hidden benefit of having more time is being able to spend more time over there. So if you see this year's congressional picture, Democrats sit on this side and Republicans sit on this side, and there's people have chairs. It's just like here, like don't sit in my area. My family's been sitting here since the founding of Sharon, you know how it is. And we took our picture and I forgot the picture was happening. And so I was like deep in the heart of the Republican territory working on getting sponsors for a bill when the picture's taken. And so it's like, there I am, this like, you know, like relatively young Democrat in a sea of navy blue. So, you know, and gray, frankly. So you get the picture, we'll give you the proof. If you doubt me, this picture is for time immemorial.
Congresswoman, last question. It's a softball. Where was your best Passover Seder?
Well, I have to confess. I
think this is my wife's writing, I think, but.
Yeah, I have to confess. So as I roast Rabbi Steinberg, I will, earlier in this talk, I will tell you that maybe my largest screw up as a congressperson was I failed to show up for this year's Passover dinner. And Abby, I am so sorry.
That is not why we asked you the question.
No, but not only was I mortified, because I had it on my calendar for the second night of Passover, not the first night. But my son, I had asked if anyone wanted to go, and my middle son was really excited about it. And so he was just like, well, can we go the next night? And I was like, that's not how it works. Like, he was like, well, will you make a Passover dinner for us? And I was thinking about how lovingly and for weeks and as a community you prepare for Passover. And then the worst part of all is I didn't get to win again at Jeopardy.
That is
because
true.
I study. Like, I'm strong.
Congresswoman came the first year to our Seder, and we do Jeopardy, and so it's really fun, and she did okay. But she came back, she knew the plagues in order, she knew all 4 questions, she could answer every question at that second Seder. You did indeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'll
We'd
see you
love
next
having
year.
you next year in Jerusalem. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. You're
Thank
awesome.
you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. What a great honor and opportunity to hear from you and hopefully to hear from us a little bit as well. It's with great pleasure that I will invite my friend Barbara Bornett to come forward. And as she does, I want to invite you in the same spirit as both Abby and my trip to Israel and Congresswoman Porter's trip to Israel. In November, we're taking a trip to Israel, one like I've never done before. I'm calling it a deep dive. We're not going to be doing a lot of touring. We're going to be meeting with people on the ground, a general, a mayor from Bethlehem, a member